too, right?
Oh, definitely. There's an underlying, with so many Southern African American artists. I mean, you see those underlying bits of culture that are ancient culture that it's kind of a mystery how'd that come up.
Sure. That and the fact that contemporary art, people that are follow a very academic route to try to study art as closely as they can. At the end of the day, shoot for being as primitive as some of this art. We talk about somebody like Jean-Michel Basquiat, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very close to the primitive, primitive
art of the streets.
You can tell what his influences were, in his pieces, and they were great. He had his own individual style, but you can still see within his style what he was influenced by, the street art and the African art, and it all rings out.
Right. And he started as Samo, doing graffiti on the streets.
Yeah.
Right? I think I read that you had some affinity for graffiti at one point, right?
We've done a number of shows of kind of railroad graffiti or moniker stuff, but not so much like the spray can, that kind of stuff. More like the moniker art of like the hobos and the railroad workers. Right. And a lot of that is kind of through meeting Bill Daniel and him showing his film here several times, the Who is Bozo Texino documentary, where he was in search of the people that were drawing on the train cars. Right. And it turns out most of them worked for the railroad, and that's why they were in the yard, drawing on cars all day long. Right. So, I do visual art myself. First, painting on T-shirts in the punk rock era, and then going out into rail yards and drawing on cars myself. Right. There's something about being a visual artist, and you're not supposed to be in the rail yard. It's dangerous, it's loud, it's really interesting. Right. And so there's a weird thing about drawing on a train car, something that starts rolling away as you're marking on it. You don't know where it's going to go, and you're not supposed to be there. It kind of is a weird spot that's somehow comforting, and even though you're not in your studio where everything is kind of the controls are on your environment the way you want
it's a message in a bottle. You don't know
in
where
a way,
going.
Yeah. And so I kind of think I'm really interested in that, and I've collected a lot of books about hobos, and then just from reading a lot of Jack Kerouac material, there's just something about the rail, traveling by rail and going from town to town, and hobos leaving marks for each other.
Yeah, I was reading a book recently. The teaching art history has really kind of piqued my interest in symbols and symbology, like we were talking earlier. I was reading a book recently about symbols, and there was a chapter in there about hobo markings. About how they would leave marks on fence posts about hey, this place has a dog that will, that will definitely, bite you, or they have a gun, or tell this sort of story, and they'll be, they'll
give you a meal or something, right?
And so they would leave all these, instructions for each other on fence posts and trees and things, and so. But it's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a whole kind of history and symbol of forms and symbols that the hobos did to communicate with each other, and they're finding a lot of that stuff. When they're working on bridge abutments, I think on the LA River they pulled some kind of bridge abutment down, and there was an old wooden structure behind that, and they saw some of the marks from some of the well-known hobos. Number one hobo, who his name was Ray Livingston. He's the guy that he used to ride the rails with Jack London, and Jack London kind of references him in some of the books where he's talking about riding the rails. And then that movie, Emperor of the North Pole, Ernest Borgnine and David Carradine play. One's the conductor who's trying to outsmart the hobo.
Right.
He catch the hobo, and the hobo always outsmarts the conductor, but he's leaving these marks around.
Yeah.
And so,
I feel like I vaguely remember seeing that movie as a kid. I watched way too many.
It came out like in 74 or something. It's a great movie. But right now, there's a museum in Massillon, Ohio. MassMu is opening a show called Moniker Identity. In about 3 weeks, it's going to open, and so graffiti artists from all over the country are all going to Massillon, Ohio for this opening of this show, and it'll be up for several months. I don't know that we're going to go to the opening, but we'll go in August when we're going to upstate New York.
Right.
We love like that, that drive. Every August for the last 5 years, we've gone to Madison, Bottville, a little flea market near Buffalo, or actually near Rochester, and going up that route.
Someplace you want to go in the summertime.
Yeah.
You go in the summertime. That's when the flea market goes on. It's like a set week when you kind of have to be there.
Right.
And they're great farmers markets up there. The Rochester Farmers Market is one of the best farmers markets I've ever been to.
The farmers markets are better than the flea markets up there.
That whole area is also the hotbed of early American occultism, and in Lilydale, New York, the spiritualist community is a place that we've gone and stayed there in the old Maplewood Hotel, where there's a number of pieces of spiritualist folk art. There's quilts made under the direction of spirits, and there's spirit photography, and a number of things that the spiritualists made as artists, but under the direction of the spirits. So that's a whole other really interesting thing. And I started collecting books on Rosicrucianism, and one of the guys that I really got fascinated in was Paschal Beverly Randolph.
Right.
He was born in 1866. He was a African American spiritualist, and later kind of started his own Rosicrucian lodges that became popular in Boston and then later in San Francisco. And I came across a number of his old books and started collecting the books. And then I think around 1986, some people put out a book, SUNY Press, about Randolph and his connection there in that part of upstate New York. He lived in that area, and there were a lot of spiritualists. So I got really interested in that whole movement, the spiritualist movement, and just the fact there was so much art created by those people. So we've done a number of trips where we've gone to sites. We went to the Eddy Brothers farmhouse up in Vermont, early spiritualists that had a farmhouse where people would come and visit and go through seances.
Someone asked us the other day, how many states have you not been to? Because we met someone who had been to every state except for Alaska.
Right.
And I was just amazed that someone could say that. And then they said, well, what about you guys? And I'm not even sure. I mean, we keep trying to go to places that we haven't been before, but we've definitely covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So is most of that ground east of the Mississippi?
No, not really.
No.
What about where the towns are few and far between, like the Dakotas in Montana?
We've done some antiquing, and we've been to the Corn Palace in Mitchell, South Dakota.
Right.
We liked Rapid City, South Dakota. Where was it? The School of Mines? Wasn't that in Rapid City?
Maybe.
Yeah, and there were good antique shops
we
there.
went up there, and I had gone with some girlfriends to see that area, and I loved it so much that Bruce and I took the next trip up there together and, did the whole thing again and saw Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills and went all kinds of antiquing and stuff. And there's definitely that area a little more to explore. I've done Montana somewhat, but Bruce hasn't done that with me yet. And I mean, there's just so much to explore, period, it seems like. But we've definitely
We have a handful of California artists that, from showing Esther Pearl Watson and Mark Todd's we've shown their friend Frida Gossett's work, and she does tool leather stuff, and then their friend Martha Rich, who taught with them at Art Center in Pasadena. And so, yeah, one thing kind of leads to the next, and you wind up showing one artist, and then you wind up showing their friends. So,
well, they're all nice people, and we like their
that's
work.
true.
Right.
That's true. We really like the West, and West Texas especially is one of our favorite areas. And I've had a number of art shows out in Marfa, at the Wrong Store, and then we show Camp Bosworth's art here. He's our show coming up.
Yeah, Camp's actually our show in September
This fall.
So we'll be going out to Marfa soon to visit them.
We've met a lot of people that have kind of been like us, that were crazy enough to have an art, gallery in a small town where there really wasn't a whole lot of support. I guess we felt like, well, we went on road trips across the country to track this stuff down. Maybe people would come to Waxahachie, and so we just kind of wound up having the gallery here. At one point, I remember we did a couple of exhibitions in Chicago with Stuart Grannon at Architectural Artifacts. We did a folk art show, and we did a couple of lodge shows with him. And we were talking about moving to Chicago, and we were up there in May, and it was still snowing. We're like, no, we can't handle this cold.
No, forget it.
So that was as close as we almost left Waxahachie and moved to Chicago at one point in the early 90s, but we never
It
did.
seems to keep us here. We're not sure. It's a very surreal place.
Right.
It's
But, we're kind of making new discoveries all the time. We just realized yesterday that the largest Alamo painting in the state
is here
is
in town.
here, and it's kept behind a curtain in the women's building here in Waxahachie. And Julie was organizing a fundraiser for our friend Carol Brewer's Nava Dog, which is a dog rescue thing. And so they went over to look at the women's building space to have a square dance kind of thing over there. And the lady's like, oh, yeah, well, we have this painting. And, they've got this giant Alamo painting.
So is it a mural, or is it
It's a mural,
camera?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like it's on wood. I didn't even see the whole thing. I just started opening the curtain, like, oh my gosh. And I just said, okay, so we can keep this curtain open during the event. And she said, yes. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll come back to that because it looks amazing. But who knew?
Right.
We've lived here since 1987. I've never heard that, never seen that.
Right.
So it's one of those kind of things that keeps you here.
Sure.
You keep making discoveries.
Yeah. The place, it's an interesting place because sometimes when you're like tapping into your art, sometimes you figure out that the most interesting stories are around your origins. And so the past couple of years, I've been thinking a lot about here, and okay, I understand what drives Anselm Kiefer to make work, and that reflects who he is and where he lives, and what narrative or what would I take from this place to put in my art, and so I've been thinking a lot about this area, and it's this is a really interesting place long before we ever showed up here.
Oh, yeah. It's a
some of the
challenging-
stories I've read, are just, pretty crazy from, going back to the 1800s, but
It's a challenging place to show art and create art, but it's full of inspiration.
Right.
Just full of it.
Right. So I guess I don't know if this is a fair question, but what percentage of your customer base is local? Does that make sense? I mean, it's like this doesn't exist here. In my mind, this doesn't exist here because of some sort of built-in customer base.
Oh, no. I think when we opened a gallery, per se, more, it was probably the craziest idea we'd ever had, And I know for a couple of years we would look at each other like, what in the world are we doing, But that increases all the time. It's surprising, Bruce and I, with
New people are moving to Waxahachie all the time. What was it? The lady at the feed store said that she had 6 new customers from California
just last week
that have bought land here in the county. And I think for a lot of people, it's affordable land, so they're kind of coming from all over the place.
And so that does